Welcome back. It's playoffs time here in the AUDL. We've built all season for this moment. The first round of the 2023 postseason begins on Saturday night. All four divisions will be active and live on AUDL TV. I am Adam Ruffner. That is Daniel Cohen. This is a preview episode previewing the first four games on the playoff schedule. We are elated to be here with you. It has been a barn burner of a season, and the action is just only going to heat up further. There are some very intriguing matchups across the board in the Central, East, South, and West divisions on Saturday night, and we're here to run you through the matchups. Of course, starting off in the East Division with Boston 7-5 visiting DC 9-3. DC sweeping the season series 2-0. Most recently, they won 22-15 on July 8th in Boston, and before that, 20-16 in DC. The Breeze defense has held Boston to just 31 goals in two meetings so far this season. Boston, going into this matchup, though, has renewed their identity this season on both sides of the disc. Their offense and defense are playing at elevated levels this franchise has not seen before, and that is why they're in their first playoff appearance. But owing to that, Boston has yet to really prove itself in big game situations. They have yet to really beat a New York or DC in any regular season going back to their establishment in the 2021 season. So Boston will be looking to kind of define a franchise with this win. And for DC, it's all about building towards their first championship weekend appearance. Of course, they've been thwarted two of the past three postseasons by their arch nemesis in New York. They host a playoff game. They presume to be the favorites to meet the Empire in the East Division championship game, but they have to take on this hard-charging Boston team, even though they've won twice so far this season. DC just has that confidence, right? They added all these great new pieces over the offseason. All of them have excelled so far this season. Thomas Edmonds, Benjamin Ort, Andrew Roy, Cole Jurek. All of their new pieces have just been excelling throughout the 2023 season up in DC. But throughout the season, we have also seen the Breeze kind of take their foot off the accelerator at times. This is one of the most talented teams. They've stood toe-to-toe with the Empire on numerous occasions the past couple of seasons. And yet, despite some very good fourth quarter play, there are times in which the Breeze can relax a little bit and allow their opponents to catch up. Now, they have some very impressive closeout wins so far this season, but they will need another one against Boston, who has clearly shown that they have a resiliency over past years. Daniel, what do you like going into this East Division matchup for Boston? How do you think that they can win this game? And then we'll get into how do we think the Breeze can take care of this matchup at home at Carlini Field?
Yeah, so for Boston, I mean, they've been on a recent tear in terms of efficiency. They had 9 turnovers against Toronto, 9 turnovers against Philly, 16 turnovers against DC, and then just 3 last weekend in the one half game they played against Montreal. So aside from just like an overall efficiency standpoint, I look at their D-line conversion rate specifically. The past 2 games against DC, they've converted like 30% of their defensive possessions, which is a lot lower than their season average for this year. So I look at guys like Tyler Chan and Rocco Linehan and the ability to lead that D-line after turnovers, because DC, we know they're not giving the disc away that easily on offense. They've been converting like crazy as well. So it's really going to put an added emphasis on that D-line conversion rate, really for both teams, the way they've been playing. So I'm definitely looking at that as kind of the margin for Boston to win this game.
Yeah, and I think it's just showing that they can be doing what they've been doing the past several weeks on the road in DC. They kind of showed it a few weeks back in the game of the week. They ended up losing that by 7 goals by the end, but there were the first 2.5 quarters where that glory offense was really staying neck and neck with the execution of the Breeze. It's just going to be the battle of how long can they sustain for 4 quarters against a DC team that has shown it really can apply pressure in that fourth and final quarter. It's sort of the medal that I think they wear through all their tests against the Empire over the seasons, where the New York has shown again and again to be the best closeout team this league has ever seen. And DC has sort of started to wear that shine a bit, right? Like, they have shown that at the end of games, they just have a finishing ability above and beyond what their competition is usually capable of. And I think that that is something Boston has to be wary of. Can they actually survive coasting behind DC into the second half, or do they kind of need to take an early lead and make DC play catch up a bit? I don't think anyone but New York and Carolina this season has shown that they can take a definitive lead on the Breeze. So that is going to be a huge question mark for the Glory. But I think it's kind of necessary, because otherwise DC can just continue to throw line after line of defensive pressure. They've shown an ability all season to execute, especially in transition. Alexander Fall has been a human highlight reel over and over and again the past month in particular. He leads one of the strongest takeaway units in the league. It's just going to be a really big challenge for a Boston team that has grown a lot, but is also going to be integrating some pieces this weekend that they haven't necessarily been playing of late with. I'm talking about, in particular, Orion Cable, Cole Davis-Brand, even Kalen McSweeney, all of whom were inactive this past weekend against Montreal. Obviously, Glory offense showing that they could take care of business without them. But there is going to be some, juggling and roster adjustments, as this team has been playing without those three all available at the same time for the past month. So Glory have, to your point, been executing at a higher level than ever. Can they sort of absorb and continue at their pace with these more notable, maybe more disc possessive stars in their lineup, right?
Right. And the Orion Cable, I know you've talked about his presence in the past. I think you did go public with your Orion Cable take, right?
I did.
I think so much of like the Boston offense we saw in the past, where it was just like Willie Stewart, Ben Sadok chucking up shots downfield, a lot of that might have been due to the presence of bigger receivers like Cable and just the confidence in those guys to come down with the disc. But because they haven't had him for so much of the season, it has been a lot more like in rhythm hucks, like line drive, power position type, like opportune deep hucking opportunities. So I feel like the Cable presence, like obviously Boston knows how to play without him. So then like how do things shift when he's brought back in? Like, can he just kind of be a cog in their very talented system of cutters, or are things going to kind of gravitate towards him? Because he is a big presence out there, to put it lightly.
Yeah. And again, like referencing back to what I said before, there is no question as to this man's talent. He's bringing a gold medal back to this team. He is an unstoppable force in single coverage much of the time. However, Boston simply has looked better without him of late. The Carapella and Tetro-led cutting core has forced the throwers into slightly different variations, and it's just been more successful without Cable. It seemed like when Cable was in the lineup, to your point of they would just throw more jump balls. There was more, I think, opportunity for then defenses to play help defense, or simply expect the kind of looks to Cable in single coverage and to know to clamp down and shut down elsewhere, and maybe even encourage that kind of single dimension attack. In lieu of Cable not being in the lineup, it's just looked so much more dynamic for Boston, I think. I think you see a lot more variation in their point of attack. I think you see a lot more engagement from their backfield too, and just sort of propelling the motion downfield. I mean, McSweeney, Davis-Brand, Sunday, Rocco Linehan, Ben Sadok, kind of anyone who rotates into their throwing roles in the backfield, I think has a lot of freedom to cycle elsewhere. And I think that that's just come about simply forming this offense without Cable available. And it'll be, to your point, really, really intriguing to see how he plays against DC, if they are going to maybe use some of his height advantage against a DC team that will be lacking some of its bigger defenders. David Cranston will not be available. Jasper Tom, Troy Holland also out. Cole Jurek is questionable. He's recovering from a foot injury. He actually has a higher completion percentage this year than Andrew Roy, who has been arguably and maybe most definitively the most precise passer in the league this year. Cole Jurek has struggled on and off with his foot injury all season, so it's kept him out of the lineup. But when he's been in, he's been one of their best executors on offense. He might not be ready to go. Also, Tyler Monroe is listed as questionable. So there are points for Boston to attack, and it will be interesting to see if they go towards exploiting a Cranston-less DC defensive lineup. I think that DC has the pieces to adjust. They've shown that all season, but a receiver the size of Cable certainly commands a certain sort of defender, and maybe the Breeze don't necessarily have that available for every single shot that Glory decide to take in Cable's direction. We shall see. But maybe pivoting over a little bit from Boston into DC. Again, this is a team with some of the most confidence, some of the most throwing skills in the entire league. but they have a tendency to sometimes, as we say, take the foot off the gas pedal, just have lapses. Is there a possibility for DC to have that come up at the wrong time against this surging Boston team? Or do you kind of expect DC to hold to the hype that we've been building around them all season, the clear talent level that this Breeze team possesses? Do you think DC just takes care of business on home and sets up a much anticipated rematch of last season's East Division Championship game?
I think that is what happens. Like I'm not really doubting DC's ability to play a more or less complete game. I mean, yeah, maybe it's not 4 quarters of like the most consistent ultimate that we've seen they can play at, but they've also been a team that has kind of been peaking as the season's gone on, very similarly to Boston. Those guys just are getting better and better and more comfortable with each other. DC's been converting 70% on offense over the last 3 games, and those games have been against Boston, Philly, Toronto, like all the teams that were kind of on their heels looking to get in the playoff race. And then defensively, they're converting on 60% in those same games. So if they're hovering at that like 60% plus conversion rate on both sides of the disc, which even with those absences, you never really doubt either unit just because they go 10 plus deep offensively. I'm not really doubting DC's ability. I do think if they do show some inconsistency, maybe it is early in this game, but I'm pretty confident like they are a team we've seen close the door on teams in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter. It was funny when you brought that up with Boston. I was thinking even with the Philly game that was like their biggest win of the season, that wasn't really them like closing the door on Philly in the fourth quarter. It was just like there wasn't enough time really for Philly to come all the way back, but it was just Philly slowly chipping away at that lead. So I feel like DC, we've definitely seen close the door on teams. So I'm pretty confident they can do the same at home against Boston. They also have like the playoff experience at this point. This is Boston's first ever playoff game. So I do think there's something to that as well.
Yeah. I trust, like just in my kind of gut read, DC to take care of business, but I do think that Boston presents one of the more interesting upstarts in this first round schedule, right? I really do see Glory being a peaking team and kind of a team too with sure they haven't been there before, but they might be so inexperienced and young to not know any better and knock off what we consider to be a top 2 or 3 team in this league in the DC Breeze. Sure. You know, of all the teams to kind of have that audacity, Glory seems to be it. And despite not necessarily having the closest results, they do have, I think, personnel to challenge DC again. You highlighted Tyler Channing, your players to watch. I absolutely think his veteran presence can be a difference maker for Boston on the road. I think you also talk about, again, like Orion Cable, Ray Tetro, the rookie Simon Carapella, who is currently tied for second in the league for most goals in his rookie season. He has been electric for them all season. Maybe he finds a favorable matchup against DC with a couple more players available from when they matched up a few weeks ago. I'm just saying I like the Breeze, but I like this matchup. I think just overall as an intriguing appetizer for whoever advances to face New York in the East Division Championship game. I think that these have clearly been the 3 best teams from week 1. You know, Boston got off to that great start. They had their trip up in the middle of the season, but I think how they finished really kind of confirmed their appearance in the postseason this year. They really took care of business in the back half of their schedule. And then DC, you know, we've talked a few times about the Breeze maybe not quite meeting some of the hype that we have internally or what we had heading into the season as far as expectations. I think given some of the signings, we were just expecting them to blow at everyone by 6 goals in the start of the second quarter, and that would kind of just be the rote script week after week as DC waited for their tests against New York. But to your point just a minute ago, you know, these other teams that were challenging for the 3rd spot in the East were continually setting up the Breeze as kind of this test of metal performance. Hey, if we can beat the Breeze, we can stick. And each time the Breeze just put down those opponents. There was no real question by the end of those games as to who stood when the dust cleared. And I think that is a testament to the Breeze. Maybe there isn't kind of the overall crushing winning aesthetic that we had sort of wanted from this Breeze team in the same way that New York just sort of dominates over its competition. But I definitely think that there is a resiliency and a talent level to this Breeze team that has exceeded prior seasons. Like I do feel like and especially after this first round matchup, that should they advance to face New York, this will be the kind of culmination of multiple seasons of Breeze and everything. And again, shout out, this is the last season of famed head coach Daryl Stanley at the head of the DC
extra motivation.
Like, there's a little bit of extra magic, I think. You could really kind of sense
for their coach.
They did the big, plaque and kind of commemorative event at their home finale last weekend. Obviously, Stanley deserves that sort of attention, but I think you could just see a little bit of that pride infuse the players. It becomes a little rote and trite to just kind of paint things in broad strokes sometimes, as far as him being such a team leader, him being such an important part of the community. These become, I think, kind of cliches at a certain point, but there is no one that has been more of that for a particular community than what Daryl Stanley has meant to the DMV, and particularly the development of a team that has always straddled, I think, a veteran and youth divide, maybe better than any in the league. You talk about a team that gets its young players reps and everything. I mean, DC has been doing that, I think, better than anyone for years, and you see the fruits of their labor now as they become one of these kind of blue blood organizations. This is a team that existed behind Toronto as kind of the 2 or 3, depending on how good New York was in a given year back when Stanley took it over. And so just kind of hats off to him, and just kind of putting a little extra cherry on top as far as what might be motivating DC. You talk about, again, Boston being, I think, a really good competitor, but maybe there isn't just enough juice to go up against the Breeze team that's starting to feel like they get a couple more, solutions in there. This is kind of becoming maybe a bit of a team of destiny, depending on how they shape up against New York. We'll see. There's a few of those this year, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We should move on from the East. Get to the Central. 6-6 Chicago visiting at Indianapolis. 9-3. Indy will be playing outdoors for this matchup, in the same venue that they played Pittsburgh at 2 weeks ago. Indy, like DC, swept the season series against Chicago. They got their first win of the season on May 13th at Chicago, 19-16, and then they took care of business, at home, 26-17 at the beginning of June against the Union. The Union have undergone a complete midseason transformation of their roster and lineup. This will be an entirely new offensive system than what we were seeing even just a few weeks ago. They will be down many starters, including Ross Barker, Christian Johnson, Paul Arders, et cetera, et cetera. So Sam Kaminsky, Nico Lake, Andrew Sjogren, they will be bootstrapping up a new O-line featuring some defensive converts and Ben Priest and Jay Stetslicki at times. Again, the Union are just kind of rolling forward with this adaptability. They qualified for the playoffs in a little bit of a down year in the Central Division. The Union took care of business, but they got losses in each of their last 2 games. So a little bit of a backing into this postseason, and just a general question of what the hell is this offense going to produce, right? Like, Union team enters the 2023 postseason as the worst executing O-line in the entire field, and by a margin, they're the lowest scoring team, they're the least efficient. There are just going to be a lot of questions against an Indy team that, as we said many times, has one of the most established identities. They are the most possession-oriented team in the AUDL on either side of the disc. They finished the regular season for the second straight year with the highest defensive conversion rate. That is a league record. No team has ever done that in back-to-back seasons, so hats off to AlleyCats. And on offense, they are a very simple team. They have all but eliminated much of the long game from their attack. This is a team that has attempted single-digit huck attempts in each of their last 8 games. They complete some of the fewest hucks in the league, which is a little surprising, I think, if you're a fan who has been following the AlleyCats for a number of years. This is a team who has really reined it in and learned to express itself through its attack, through dispossession, swinging the disc, and making that extra pass. However, Indy will be without one of its leaders in Travis Carpenter in this first-round playoff game. They do return Xavier Payne and Keegan North, who have been absent in some of their recent matchups, so there will still be more than enough throwing talent available for the home team AlleyCats. But there are just going to be a lot of questions for Indy as they transition from playing the first half of their season into the outdoors, and with that, just there being a little bit more of them focusing on possession and possibly playing into some of the strategy that Chicago is hoping to use in their new lineup formation. Chicago, of course, has struggled to score the disc all season. That probably will continue as they look to format a new offense. So they're going to be looking to keep the score low. Indy, sometimes because they are so huck-averse and because they are so concentrated on simply possessing the disc, making a swing, and keeping the disc in their possession on offense, they can sometimes decrease the overall scoring potential in the game, which shrinks the margins. That is exactly what the Union are going to be trying to do in this round one game. So is Indy kind of playing into the hands of what Chicago might be trying to do on the road here? Daniel, I think you're in agreement with me. Indy stands as pretty obvious favorites entering this matchup. They won both games so far this season.
Yeah.
They have so much more consistency. Chicago just littered with questions. However, again, the AlleyCats don't always like to open it up on offense these days, and so it could lead to the Union lingering around a little bit. And their defense, for not getting the most amount of opportunities, for overgoing a whole bunch of overhauling during the offseason, for not having Nate Goff and a whole bunch of starters available. Jace Brunner, the captain, has played well. They do show a spark at times to take advantage of opportunities. Can Chicago keep this game, and can they possibly get the upset and advance to face Minnesota in the Central Division Championship game for the third straight year?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you think about what Chicago has to do to win this game, I feel like it's easy to just look at the offense and be like, okay, their offense just needs to play anywhere close to where they've been the past couple of years, which we haven't seen in any game so far this season. But I almost look at the defense as a more critical component for Chicago, which is interesting because they're shifting Steslicki and Priest. Priest has been playing offense, but yeah, some of those early D-line quarterback types are now playing on the O-line. But defensively, they just need to, I'm almost looking at it from a coaching standpoint, they need to pull out all of their stops, all of their creative zone person looks, just try to create mayhem out there, because Indy is so possession oriented. If they can get some of those backfield turnovers or jumping underneath route and poach off their guys in a way that allow them to ignite a quick break attack. Dex Dremen has been fantastic at quarterback in this D-line. I do think they're getting back Axel Agami, who to very early in the season was kind of in that prototypical D-line QB mold alongside Priest and Steslicki. So they will have opportunities. I just think they're gonna have to do something to gum up Indy's attack, because as up and down as this O-line has been, or mostly down, I don't see that changing this game. Although I will say they have a pretty thrower heavy lineup offensively, because it's Nico Lake, it's Kaminsky, Wyatt Meckler's a handler, and then you're moving over Steslicki and Priest. It's a lot. It's going to be a lot of small ball and throw and go heavy movement, which I do see some potential in. But all that said, I don't think the offense is going to be the reason that they would pull out the win. I think it would be defensively, because honestly, their defense has been converting better than their offense has in pretty much every single game this season. I think season long, it's 54% D-line versus 42% on the O-line. So yeah, it's weird to think that the defense would be the reason for them to win this game, considering they're shifting the pieces to help the offense, but that's what I would point to.
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with you. And I do think, Brunner is obviously a player who I think will take advantage of some of the shorter mid-range passes that Indy likes to make. He's such a shark in those lane opportunities, and he's so quick and explosive in short spaces that I think he can be an obvious difference maker. He's got 15 blocks this season. He's really had an underrated second half. And, it wasn't so long ago that Chicago was in Minnesota against the wind chill, and they sprinted out to a 4-0 lead before the offense gave away the game to the Minnesota D-line break train. But, that was Brunner and that Chicago defense getting out early. And I don't know if Indy has the same capability to roll back and up over Chicago in the same way that Minnesota did with their defensive break train. Obviously, Indy is phenomenally efficient in getting those break opportunities, but it's not exactly like they just roll them up in bunches. They're pretty select in earning break opportunities. The rookies Will Quigley and Will Wettengale, have been amazing in 2023, no doubt. But aside from them, AlleyCats still one of those teams that doesn't maybe generate the most amount of turnovers, and that's kind of why they founded this system of inefficiency on their D-line counters, because they have to figure out a way to leverage what winning opportunities they do have, even if they don't necessarily have all the athletic pieces to just play shutdown matchup defense at every single point. I think that they have been one of the best teams at sort of deploying different strategies. I remember when they were playing at Madison, they kept running that double team of Wettengale and Quigley, which is just 20 feet of arms and legs cinching around a handler on a double team trap on the sideline. And I really like those kinds of looks and trappings that Indy runs out on teams. And it's sort of, I think what you were even saying about Chicago should mirror. There should just be kind of a never-ending, evolving set of coverages from the Union to kind of flummox what Indy is trying to do. Because if you just let Indy settle in and possess the disc and kind of work through their routes and progressions, that's exactly what the AlleyCats have been really, really good at this season. And in fact, I think that's kind of almost what set up Madison for a little bit of failure in both of their games, is that the zone kind of worked counterintuitively and maybe gave a few too many touches to all of those throwers on the AlleyCats. So maybe that's something where you want to get them a few less touches simply to not allow them to get into rhythm in this game. But again, we've always said it. This is why we're behind microphones, not carrying clipboards on the sideline. We are not coaches. Yeah. We are just admirers. So Indy still feels like the heavy favorites. Chicago, it feels like if they get some kind of defensive presence, is there any hope for Chicago's O-line? Like, how do you see them having success in this game given their almost complete lack of reps? I mean, this is an offense that kind of got instituted even midway through their last matchup at Madison, and the result of that was Radicals running rampant with breaks in the second half. I know you say that there's a lot of throwers on this offense, but in the limited data that we have so far, that looked like a very constricted field on which defenders could blitz into available spaces to create turns. I think Madison continued to run sideline traps and let the Union try to throw over the top and simply had offside defenders helping and swatting the disc down. And then they're off in numbers in the opposite way. And, you know, just kind of talking through this out loud too, there are advantages to having throwers on an offensive unit. And I don't want to make complete generalizations here, but sometimes throwers aren't also the most athletic individuals in coverage off of turnovers. And I think you saw a little bit of that against Madison, where the Radicals were simply able to run following a Chicago mistake and take advantage of speed and space in a way that Chicago just wasn't able to recover from as quickly. And I worry a little bit about that with the AlleyCats because their break conversions are so good at kind of running with numbers when they are available and taking advantage of those mismatches and transition. So it'll be interesting to see if in the past, 10 days or so, if Chicago has maybe buttoned up a little bit, or not 10 days. Sorry, that was last Friday. Feels like a lot longer ago, but hopefully within that span, Chicago has kind of figured out a few of those bumps in the road.
It's just so different than what we thought coming into the season, right? Like we were thinking, okay, it'd be Shanahan, Arders, Sjogren, Barker, kind of like propelling the offense forward from like a downfield continuation thrower vibe. But at this point, like they don't have any real like downfield threats besides Andrew Sjogren. Like you can't just have one go-to cutter on the line. So yeah, I mean, I worry about their ability to stretch the field. I worry about like kind of the overall connectedness of the offense when you don't have like a core of four cutters that can continue moving the disc. So I guess I see the benefit in the throwers, particularly in the red zone. Like I think the Steslicki, Priest, Lake, Meckler, like the throw and go stuff they can run in the red zone in particular is really nice to watch a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think like working up the length of the field could be an issue for them, and just the lack of reps this crew has had together, it's just a tough spot to be in. Like, yeah, you saw so many of those like crossfield hammers just being bad throws and like easily deflected by the Madison defense, and then the Madison defense just gets off running right out of those traps. And I just think that's something that like you need practice and reps to get good at getting out of those spots. And I just don't have a lot of trust in the Chicago offense to overcome, like different defensive looks that Indy might throw.
Right. And not to say that like the central defensive meta is so much different than everywhere else, but I will say as far as like learned sort of situations you have to have underneath of your belt going up against central division defenses, you can't just run out relatively new units and expecting a whole bunch of success, because most of those defenses have a variety of variations that they can throw at you, even as far as zone looks, trap looks, and kind of present to you again, a variety of options for your brain to have to process in real time. And if you simply don't have the muscle memory, you're going to be making hesitations that those defensive coverages will take advantage of. And I think that you saw that against Madison. It's not to say, like, to your point, that these are throwers lacking in any kind of skill. They just simply have not played as that variation of that unit. And so those little bit of pump fake hesitations, that couple extra seconds holding the disc, that adds up in huge ways for defensive coverage.
It's also worth mentioning that, like, it's been Pavel for the past 5 years that's been picking up the disc repeatedly on those sideline situations. So even when it's like Kaminsky, like, he's been doing it this season, but still, like, grand scheme of things, there's just a lack of experience on this offense still.
Yeah. I mean, they've lacked that kind of true pivot handler that has been the cornerstone of their franchise the past 5 seasons. He's out west, still competing in the playoffs himself. We'll get to the West Division in just a moment, but let's stop first at the South Division matchup between the 7-5 Carolina Flyers, who just played on Tuesday in a warm-up against another Texas opponent from Dallas, but they will travel to Austin on Saturday night to face the 9-3 Austin Soul. Austin will be near full strength. Carolina will be down Liam Searles-Bowes and Matthew Johannes, both of whom have missed a significant portion of the second half of the season. The Flyers have not played much since the beginning of July. However, they do hold the 2-0 season series advantage over the Soul. They also beat this Austin team in last year's South Division championship game. So Flyers, despite trailing a couple games in the standings, definitely having the confidence edge entering this first round South Division matchup. And for Austin, despite their 9 wins, they have yet to beat a team with a winning record in 2023, and they just look like a categorically different team than I think who we expected them to be heading into the season, and the kind of high they were coming off of last year with quality wins against the Flyers, with a quality win against Atlanta, with those strong competition games against top interdivisional opponents. This season's Soul team, as you were just saying about Chicago a second ago, the defense has largely out-executed the Soul offense over and again this year. For as talented and as many highlight playmakers as Austin has available on the offensive side of the disc, they just have not had any kind of consistency this year. And on the defense, it's been again and again these 10-plus break score barrages on opponents, particularly from Houston and Dallas. They have led the league this year in break scores per game average. Joey Wiley having a career year, but up and down that roster, Matt Armour, I'm going to be forgetting names, Mick Walter, of course, just everyone it feels like is having a banner year. Elliot Moore on the counterattack for the Soul. Speaking of a team that loves to get out and transition quickly, I don't know if there's a team that attacks more off of a turnover than the Soul. Carolina, though, they've had their ups and downs. They've had so many different variations on lineups. This is despite lacking their hyphenated stars in Searles-Bowes and Gucho Hannes. They still have one of their strongest lineups of the season. It is much stronger than the one they traveled to Atlanta with last weekend, or the one they played on Tuesday against Dallas. Joe White will be active, a player you highlighted in your Players to Watch article. Also, Alex Davis returns after missing some time. Jacob Fairfax is coming off of a phenomenal set of games. This is still a Carolina team that is not so far removed from their 2021 championship, particularly in just their roster formation and talent level. And yet this South Division slate, before it reaches the championship game, which Atlanta will be hosting, these two teams have flown underneath expectations so far this year. You know, Carolina got that huge win in week 6 at DC, kind of their defining moment of the season, and really what kind of clinched their playoff appearance, I think, this year. And then since that moment, it's kind of been a little bit of backing in, right? Like, they've taken care of business and they've had to, but they lost at Philly. They lose a couple times to Atlanta. They lose that season series 3-1, and kind of a lot of, I think, the momentum that they've built over the past several seasons against the hustle. They've obviously taken care of business in the 2 matchups they've had so far this year with the Soul, but we don't necessarily know what to expect from the Flyers. This is still one of the most eminently talented teams, and yet with their roster inconsistency, there's still just questions as to what's going to happen against the Soul, and particularly against the Soul team that can be dynamic in converting break scores if Carolina does happen to get a bit sloppy, as they did in their matchup at Austin. Carolina, I think, held almost a wire-to-wire win in that, but the Soul were able to battle back continually because Carolina had 20-plus turnovers and were a little bit careless with mistakes. And it felt like an environment that the Soul could be prosperous in. Now, Austin didn't end up winning that game. They lost 22-20. But what are you kind of expecting from this matchup, I guess? Like, where do you see both of these teams playing? It feels like we haven't gotten a clear-eyed look at either the Flyers or the Soul really in 2023 much. So what do they have going into the biggest game of the season for both franchises?
Yeah, both teams are in super interesting spots. Just from an efficiency standpoint, Carolina's had 4 games this year where they've had 20-plus turnovers, which was something that was like unheard of for the past 2 seasons before that. I think they had 1 last year, maybe were flawless in their championship run in 2021. So yeah, I think the biggest question with Carolina to me is just, that lineup consistency and also the Joe White effect. Obviously, that DC game stands out because it was a big win, but it was also like one of the biggest individual performances we've seen in the entire league this year. Joe White had nearly 800 yards of offense, 13 scores. Like, are we going to get that Joe White, or are we going to get a Joe White who we saw with Chicago in the championship game against New York last year, where it was like a couple throwaways, a drop, and just like part of that was the usage too. Like, it was just some like spotty usage, some on offense, some on defense. Like, there's not an identity being built around Joe White. So it's just like hard to know what to make of the Flyers team. And when you have a guy like White, Elijah Long, and Saul Yannick all playing offense together, presumably, I mean, we don't know exactly what they're going to do with their rotations, but that's like a lot of kind of aggressive throwing playmakers. And like, is it too much of that? Like, Saul Yannick had 8 assists last time they went to Austin, but he also had 6 throwaways that game. So he's been a little bit up and down this season. I really think that Gucho Hanna's absence is huge. Also, Liam Searlsbos has been great when he's played, but Gucho Hannes has been like a staple for the franchise over the past couple seasons. And obviously, like, the way he has helped form the identity of that offense and just being a rock in that backfield alongside Yannick, there's just been a lot more instability this year. So with Carolina, like, to me, if their offense is clicking, then they'll win this game. If Joe White has one of his good games, they'll win this game. But if it's, again, one of those like 20-plus turnovers, a little weird sloppiness, I agree with you. Like, Austin's D-line is not to be messed with. Like, that is a D-line that can go on runs. And I think we saw that some in their game against Carolina, the one that they won last year, both offensively and defensively. They were kind of just making more plays than Carolina. So it's super interesting because I think Austin is the one team that we have the biggest question mark on right now, given that they've only played 3 really good opponents this year, right? Or 3 really good games, 2 against Carolina, 1 against Atlanta. And then I also wonder, like, do you think Austin's numbers, like, I know their offense hasn't been that efficient, but is part of that just the fact that they were playing Dallas and Houston, and maybe like whatever, wind wise or weather wise, or maybe just like mentality wise, they knew that they could kind of get away with playing looser? Like, do they have it in them to turn it on for a game that really matters like this one?
Had there been any sign of it before now in the other 12 tests they faced this season? Sure, but there's no data for that, right? And this isn't some team that's shown it wins the big games through a set of years. You know, if DC or Carolina does something like that, sure, absolutely. I will grant it to them that they have a little bit of an ability to engage a button or a switch or however you want to kind of phrase it to kickstart into that higher gear now that the playoffs are here. But I don't know if I buy that for a team like Austin that is still fighting so much for its respectability in this division. You know, if Carolina was having a down year this year, it kind of stood, given how the results were last year, that Austin might be the team to sort of take over the division lead. That's not what happened. They're now still stuck in that, second spot in the South. And so they need to go out there and prove it. This is a big prove it game for Austin, and they haven't shown much of anything this year. They're phenomenally talented on both sides of the disc. I think we entered this year talking about them being a possible championship dark horse as far as their, talent ceiling possibilities. And it's just been nowhere near that. I do think that the amount of defensive break opportunities certainly disrupts the ability to foment offensive chemistry.
Sure.
But I don't think that that's the total cause there. I think that there's a lot other focus issues and just adaptation stuff from losing some of the pieces that they had last year and integrating some of the newer pieces this year. There's just been a clear stylistic change and just how they kind of attack the field. It felt like 2022 Seoul employed 7 throwers at any given time on their offense and were able to just spread attack and engage vertically. This year, it feels a little bit more like go big or go home. Austin ball has returned to the Seoul where it's 4 vertical routes and hoping someone gets open in kind of their individual matchup. But there isn't so much of the, I think, chemistry as that was shown last year. It's a lot more of Fitzgerald and Radak quarterbacking in the backfield, looking for someone to get open. It feels a lot less of Henke having those heavy distribution games from that kind of midfield shooter role. So we'll see if maybe Seoul kind of change back to that as they face a more familiar and higher level opponent in Carolina.
I think they have to. I think that's how they win.
I don't think that this is the right opponent to do that against, right? Like, Carolina is a true warrior kind of matchup. Like, they are a real deal championship level threat. And I just don't know that you can say, like, all right, this is the game where we play the game that we've sort of been pursuing all season. Like, the Flyers are going to throw some curveballs. They're going to make you play a slight variation on what you like to, and you're going to have to roll with it a little bit. I think last year, Austin did a great job of that in the playoff game. Carolina sort of forced them into, hey, you got to go long and make big plays. And Evan Swiatek and Kyle Henke kind of responded with, oh, okay, we'll do that. Austin made a series of highlight plays in that playoff matchup in 2022. It feels like they're still making all those highlight plays, but it feels like that's kind of the extent of what their offense has been doing. Like, there isn't more of those possession-based drives. There isn't more of spreading 7 on the field and working it. It's such a dissimilarity to say like a DC or an Indy style offense to watch the 2023 Austin Seoul.
Yeah, I just feel like the best version of Austin's offense, as it's been the past few years, is when they can string together those like 7 to 10 throw drives where they're just getting like a few 10 to 15 yard chunk gains and just like kind of a seamless cutting chemistry down the field, rather than just like, I feel like they just take unnecessary shots too much. Like, it's Radak getting too excited. It's Mark Evans pulling the trigger when he doesn't need to. And there's a game, I think it was against Carolina. Yeah, it was that first game against Carolina they played in Carolina. They had a few points where, because Carolina also hucks it a ton. I think Austin is, I believe, 6th in the league in hucks per game. Carolina's 5th. There was one possession where both teams were just like chucking it back and forth and turning the disc over like a few times each. And it's just like, you don't need to do that, especially if Carolina gets sucked into that mentality, like with their big throwers that they have. If they're gifting you the disc, just be patient, man. I just want some more patience from Austin. Don't get too excited when you get possessions. That's my advice.
I'm glad you're giving advice heading into the playoffs.
It's my coaching angle. Just don't get too
Daniel's
excited.
Advice column, Daniel's advice corner for the playoffs, particularly.
Yeah,
no, that'll work out.
To come down.
I mean, I totally agree. I think that Austin certainly has the ability. It's just that that's all it's been, is this theoretical notion.
Right. Yeah.
And I think at least with Carolina, for their inconsistencies, we've seen the top end. Like, we have the DC game. Even against Philly, like, they were playing well. Philly just kind of had the inspiration of seeking a franchise-defining win at home when they had the available opportunity. And, like, much like Austin did last year against Carolina on the road, Philly seized it. And I think that that's more of a credit to the Phoenix. It wasn't necessarily like Carolina played a bad game when they went to Philadelphia, And,
I agree.
But, one last point I wanted to make about Carolina, and you touched on it. I don't think that there's been any greater of a correlation between the single player's impact and the output of their team than the absences of Gucho Hannes this year, and the way in which those 20 turnover plus games are suddenly becoming a lot more common for Carolina. We talk about what are instrumental pieces in kind of constructing a team, and I think far too often we don't give enough credence to the level of pivot handlers, and particularly a Gucho Hannes, who simply goes back there and completes every single damn pass at a 98% clip for the past 2+ seasons. When you have that kind of reliable turret in your backfield, you can just sort of build everything off of it. And you see the way in which they know and that QB1 will not be possessed, and it gives everyone else in that Carolina offense more confidence in their throwing power and the kinds of looks they can take, because they know they can always reset it and get it back to Gucho Hannes, who simply does the right thing almost at a computer level of processing. And I think that you see when he's not available, it skews Carolina a bit. You could see it against Atlanta. They were just possessions as they went into overtime where it's like he would be the one making a difference here. Like, I reflect back on how good he was when Carolina beat Atlanta in Atlanta at the midseason point in 2022. He had like one of his best games of his career. I think he completed 82 of 82 throws. He had one or two interceptions. It was just one of those games that reminds you, like, sure, these aren't stat stuffing numbers. I think he finished with 1 or 2 assists, maybe a goal, but there was no doubt as to his effect on a game with that slim of margins. And you just see this year, there's a little bit more wavering. There's a little bit more, we don't quite know exactly who to go to in this red zone scenario when it's MGH, it's every other him, right? Or he's fullback diving into the end zone as a receiver and getting kind of one of those cute little chisel throws from Saul Yannick or something. Like, he's just so optimized in those small spaces and in clutch moments. It's been interesting to watch the Flyers try to evolve without that kind of central pillar that has been so important to the 2021 championship season, to last year, where I think they had the one game above 20 turnovers. Otherwise, I think everything else is like 18 or under. But should move on from South Division. Let's move to the West Division. Last but not least, LA versus Colorado. LA, of course, winning a thriller last Friday at home and getting some help from their SoCal rivals in San Diego on exterminating the Spiders. LA now qualifying for the playoffs for the first time since 2019. The accomplishment has already been reached for the new regime under Pavel Giannis, Sean McDougall, and all the new pieces LA added over the offseason. Came a bit sooner, I think, than we even anticipated. There was a lot of hype, of course, around the Aviators, but they continue to fly higher and higher. But they will have a terrific test as they go to Colorado to face the 8-4 Summit. Summit, of course, losing 4 games this season, 3 of which by a single goal in the final moments. This is an absolute blue-blooded competitor, especially if you dig a little bit into the stats. Summit ranking as one of the 2 to 3 best defenses in the league across the board in numerous fields. Colorado has always played terrifically in front of their home crowd. They stand to have a sizable home field advantage against an LA team that definitely deserves to be here, but needed a lot of help in order to actually make it into the postseason. LA has really ridden on top of their new star power. We've talked all season about the performances of Pavel Giannis and Sean McDougall playing like MVPs. Brandon Van Dusen also stepped up to that level seemingly this past weekend. It's just felt like everyone continues to play at an elevated level. The rookie, Lucas Ambrose, has been playing like the best dang defender in the entire AUDL in the back half of the season. He leads the league in takeaways. This is an LA team that has been getting the most out of the players it puts in its highest and most elevated positions. They will be trying to do that on the road, even though they only scored 29 goals in the first 2 matchups against Colorado this season. However, both of those matchups occurring in the beginning part of May. It was a completely different kind of LA team at that point in the season. The Colorado and their strong defense certainly take advantage of the Aviators and getting wins in both of those games. But now the Aviators come into this first round battle looking like a completely renewed team. I think the Summit are definitely up to understanding the new challenge that Aviators possess after they last met on May 20th, over 2 months ago. So I think Colorado will be able to kind of absorb the new evolutions that LA has gone through. But for LA, is this maybe just too much too soon? Is this too strong of a competitor? There's a lot of angles going into this matchup. I mean, going into the season, Pavlianis talked about LA being a particular thorn in Colorado's side. That has not been the case so far. The Summit stand to have a pretty sizable advantage going into this game, but the LA will be returning a couple notable playmakers in Daniel Brunker and Matt Miller, both of which who have missed numerous weeks of absences. Brunker played for Colorado last year during their championship weekend appearance. He has been a great and versatile two-way player. He was really starting to emerge as a central cog in this LA defensive lineup before he got injured. It will be interesting to see where he can come to inserting back into the lineup. Miller has been a spark plug on both lineups the past 2 seasons. What do you like about this matchup? Obviously, Colorado has a lot of defensive prowess going in. LA has, again, that star power and kind of the twin engines of McDougal and Giannis, and even a third now in Van Duzen emerging on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you kind of go to in this West Division matchup? It was so defensively dominated at the beginning of the season, but given how the West has been playing out lately, I don't know if I trust that to be where this game ends up. I think it's where Colorado wants. I think Colorado wants another,
for sure,
35 or less combined scores. We just kind of put them on the mat and make them struggle through every offensive scenario. I just think LA might have enough confidence and weapons to be able to push a little bit against that.
Yeah, I mean, those early games, that was like, it was back when we were talking about like the disconnectedness of the LA offense, where it was very much like dominator set in the backfields, cutters downfields, not really any connection in between. So like that's the key for LA, is to kind of like continue that trend that we've seen throughout the season. Like they looked so good just as a full unit in that last game against Oakland, and have kind of like evolved to that point throughout the season. But like, is it something Colorado just did defensively to them early on, where Colorado's defense was able to create that separation in the offense? Like, do we see that come back? Or is this something that LA has just like kind of crafted their new identity around, and it's like a runaway train at this point when you have Sean McDougal playing the way he is? So I'm really interested just for that kind of contrast of storylines that I feel like has been developing, especially with Colorado's defense. Like, they'll have Kai Marshall, they'll have Saeed Semran is back. Like, this is a relatively full strength Colorado defense. I know they will be missing Matthew Agee and Alex Tatum, which are 2 tough losses, but they have the defensive depth to kind of rotate guys around. And I do think that's going to be the biggest challenge for LA, is just keeping the offensive mojo that they've been gaining throughout the season against a really good defense.
And then kind of flipping it over to the other side, if there has been a question about this Colorado team, it's been on the offensive side of the disc. And in particular, It's been around Jonathan Nethercutt, who will be absent from this playoff matchup. He has been questionable in some of his activeness the past back half of the season, and the offense will be moving forward without the 2017 MVP. He led the league in assists after, I believe, the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
But he has clearly been absent from what the attack of this Summit team is trying to accomplish. And I think you saw in that New York game, in particular, Colorado's last matchup, that they had sort of moved on from Nethercutt, who was so central to this team's offensive styles in their first season in 2022. And so it's been kind of this new and unforeseen adaptation for Colorado's offense. And they certainly have the talent to take advantage of that. They certainly have the system, I think, to put into place, but there's clearly some growing pains here, right? Like you could see it against New York in that fourth quarter, where Colorado had a halftime lead and they simply couldn't possess well enough in that fourth quarter to remain competitive against an Empire defense that was looking to just close the dang thing out. And I think that Colorado, again, enters this LA matchup with a lot of favorable individual places where they can leverage their athletes. You talk about Quinn Finer, Calvin Stoughton, Danny Landesman, Alex Atkins. That might be the most talented foursome of athletic playmakers any offense in the league has, right? Like, other than the sort of quartet up in New York, I mean, up and coming Colorado is it, right?
Well,
And
and those four, by the way, also Jay Frude, Matt Jackson, right?
pretty
Like
good,
whoever else they put in.
pretty good players.
Yeah. It's like an all hybrid line, right? Like, and I think that's kind of the benefit you see in moving away from Nethercut is it feels like kind of a lot more flexibility is going to be there offensively. But yeah, I think that is definitely the biggest question, especially when, like, yeah, early in the season it was Nethercut. Then they had like the Nethercut, the famous and infamous Nethercut Spicer switch against Salt Lake. Like, we've been able to visibly see kind of the inconsistency of the offense. And like, is it going to be super Alex Atkins based? Is it going to be more of like a spread approach without one true quarterback? I really don't know what to expect. Especially with Landisman and Stoughton coming back into the picture, because it is funny though, the one game they played together and the one game that we kind of saw like the current lineup for this weekend was their home game against Oakland this year, which just so happened to be their highest scoring game of the entire year. They put up 27 at home against Oakland. So I don't know. I guess, yeah, how much confidence do you have in the Colorado offense, especially against an LA defense that I feel like has also kind of gained some mojo as the season's gone on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the LA's defensive evolution, particularly without Matt Miller, Daniel Brunker, and Jason Valley available for much of the season, is one of the more undertold storylines of this entire year. I mean, we've talked a bunch about Lucas Ambrose, but the veterans and Andrew Padula and Mitchell Steiner have been playing incredible coverage for them. They're getting a lot of, I think, complementary play from sort of the role players and depth rotation pieces. They have a lot of different coverages and good pullers that they can throw at people. You saw in the second half of that comeback win against Oakland that they were able to do some trap looks and just sort of stunt a little bit of the fast break flow that the Spiders like to get into on offense. You could see them stymieing some of that and making them take more, I think, disconnected looks from the backfield, downfield into help defense. Of course, Lucas Ambrose coming away with that big support block in the closing moments of that game. That's kind of where my mind goes. Yeah, I think there are ways in which the Aviators defense can potentially take advantage, but I wouldn't quite say that the LA Aviators defense is stout enough to prevent much of the damage of what Colorado is capable of doing. Yeah. And you could see that even against Oakland. I mean, they allowed 23 goals. It was 24-23. Yeah. This wasn't a low-scoring affair. It wasn't like the Aviators defense really came out and stymied and shut down Oakland. I mean, the Spiders were rolling in the first half of that game, particularly with their huck looks.
Yeah.
Colorado, very much known for liking the long ball. And I think that they could very much be boosted by a huge home crowd. You saw it even against New York. They were not shy about taking advantage of the opportunities that they had and throwing the disc downfield. I mean, and again, in the similar formation of this lineup, you mentioned the game against Oakland. I also think about the second meeting against Salt Lake in Salt Lake when it was Stoughton and Atkins and Feiner running much of that offense, and they were rolling against a very good shred defense for a lot of that game at elevation. It looked like it kind of caught up to them in the fourth quarter, but they did it again the next night in Oakland. So I really like the speed of this Colorado offense. No surprise there. As you mentioned, it takes even like 4 or 5 players deep to get to Jay Frude and Matt Jackson. Some players who lack no foot speed whatsoever. I just think there's sort of a pressure of verticality that Colorado could exert on LA that might be a little problematic for an Aviators team that might have played the kind of game of their season already last Friday. That's another worry that I have for the Aviators, that this might be a bit of a come down after the excitement of week 13 in the West Division. You know, I think that Aviators would definitely appreciate this matchup. There's a ton to learn from. They have so many inexperienced players getting some of their first playoff opportunities in the AUDL. That will be terrific. But on Colorado's side, the Summit are a team who expect to win a championship in 2023. And they, again, haven't really had that definitive closeout win against a good team. I mean, you could talk about that win against Oakland as being one of their most definitive wins of the season at the point. And that Spiders team didn't make the playoffs. So I kind of expect the Summit to come out and maybe do a little bit of a show of force against LA if the Aviators aren't careful in possessing the disc. I could really see this defense, again, playing, I think, a little bit less explosively in the open field with some of their block generating than they were in 2022, but all the more impressive in limiting some of the things that opposing offenses are trying to do. I mean, you talk about the first half that they played against the Empire offense in week 12. That was some of the best defensive coverage we've seen against the Empire. Yeah. And that was largely through just identifying good matchups and how they could start to disconnect some of the rhythm of New York's potent offense. And I think that you're going to see something very similar against LA, who loves, similar to New York, to run through their stars, quite obviously. So be interesting to see Colorado's game planning. It'll be interesting to see LA's playmaking and execution. All 4 divisional matchups, again, taking place on Saturday, July 29th, live on AUDL TV.
Before we wrap up,
yeah,
can we go through the revenge game narratives for LA and Colorado real quick? We got Daniel Brunker coming back for LA, playing against his former team. We got Danny Landesman playing for Colorado, playing against his dad, Jeff, who coaches LA. Yeah. And then, Pavel is sort of like a pseudo revenge game just because of his Colorado ties. He went to school in Colorado, but never played for the Summit. But did go to the first ever Summit tryout last year. We'll put an asterisk by Pavel.
He likes to think he would make the team. There's no proof that he would make the Colorado. We don't know. We don't know. He might, maybe Colorado is tough love for Pavel. We'll see. We'll see that on Saturday night as the Summit get prepared to host LA. Again, all 4 divisions will be active on Saturday night in the opening round of the playoffs on AUDL TV. If you want to find additional coverage, you can go to the AUDL website or check in on the AUDL social media channels. That will do it for Daniel and I here today on the preview episode, but we will be back on Sunday to do a full recap of the first round of the 2023 AUDL Playoffs. We thank you so much for joining us here and now. We will be talking to you in just a short while. Stay tuned for a thrilling weekend of postseason action. We can't wait. We'll be watching alongside you. See you soon. Bye now.